Hello, everyone. Oh, hello? Everyone hear me? Yep. Great. Okay. So I want to do something a little bit different from some of the other presentations you've seen today. So most of the presentations you've seen today have been kind of informing you about how to kind of run and trade your websites, how to kind of get the most commercial out of them. What I want to talk to you about today is a little bit more about the journey that we've been on at Clark's. And that starts right the way in 1825. So most people around this area are probably pretty familiar with Clark's. It's one of the kind of largest, if not largest employers in street, if not across kind of the whole of Somerset. But what most people won't realize about Clark's is we actually didn't start off making shoes. Clark's was originally a carpet and rug manufacturing company. And it was actually the offcuts of various different bits and pieces of sheep, wool type material that were stitched together that effectively became the kind of beginnings of the Clark's shoe business. And so originally Clark's made slippers as a byproduct of those shoes. So although we've been shoemakers since 1825, we've actually been an international company since 1820, shipping various different kind of products made out of various different animal materials into Ireland. And the reason I'm stood here is because I'm never going to remember all these dates off the top of my head. In 1830, we then started shipping those kind of products into Canada. And in 1850, Australia. So pretty much following the kind of British Empire route around the world. It was around about the 1850 period when we started to sell in Australia that Clark's decided to stop making the kind of less shoe-based products and really focus in on the shoe market. But it took all the way until 1950 to begin making inroads into the American market. And that was with the quite famous desert boot that a lot of people were probably quite familiar with from Clark's. However, at that point in time, Clark's made a decision to split up its business. And rather than run kind of one big global international business, to split that business up into lots of smaller businesses. And so Clark's North America was born as a separate entity. The Asian section of the business was split off, and that included the Australian business. And really, those were traded very much as separate businesses up until 2010, when Clark's decided to kind of merge those businesses back together again into a single global shoe retailer. Now, the reason I'm kind of telling you all this is, as we start to talk about our journey, you can probably pick up that there's an enormous amount of heritage at Clark's, which has both positive pieces, and for some of you who've worked in kind of bigger, older retailers before, quite some kind of hindrances as well. But kind of the uniqueness there is how Clark's split apart as a company and then came back together again. And essentially that led us into a position where we had very, very separate business models in in different countries. So if I said Clark's to a UK-based audience, you'd probably immediately think school shoes. And you'd probably sit there and think, I remember getting dragged to a shoe shop in my younger days, depending on how old or young you are, depends on the kind of, whether you had the lovely electronic fitting machines that you thought when you were a child were going to eat your feet, or whether you went right the way back to the point where it all used to be manually measured and fitted. And that kind of leads us on to where we are now, with 191 years of history. We operate in 75 different countries. Now, going back to my point earlier about what I would say, I talk to a UK audience, if I had this same discussion with the US audience and I mentioned kid shoes, they'd all look at me completely blankly as if like, what is this guy talking about? Clark's sell kid shoes in America? Because obviously in the UK, we've got the kind of school uniform type policies. We've become pretty famous around school shoes. But in America, there's very few schools except the real kind of high-end schools that have school uniforms. So why is anyone going to want to buy school shoes when you can buy Nike trainers. So we've got quite a different product offering in different countries. So in America, we're much more famous at the older end of the market. And then if we look out to some of our Asian businesses, again, dependent on which country it's in, we can go right the way up the premium chain and actually be in some pretty high-end shopping malls competing with some pretty high-end fashion retailers. We sell 55 million pairs of shoes a year. We have 1,500 stores worldwide, and that's equating to £1.5 billion in sales. Now, you've probably also noticed that Clarks not only has their own stores, but we also sell in partners, so like John Lewis. And actually, if you look to some of our other regions and countries, that kind of split between our own retail and selling for others shifts quite dramatically. So in Asia, we tend to sell a lot through marketplaces and resellers. And again, in America and Canada, we're primarily a B2B business, and B2C actually is a smaller section of the business. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get Becci to come up on the stage, and I'm going to get Becci to take you through the kind of digital aspects of where that fits into our history.
Hi, everyone. The digital timeline for Clarks actually ties in quite nicely with my journey at Clarks. So I joined Clarks 14 years ago, never intending to stay that long. And I was 4 years in, so 10 years ago, I needed a change. And there was something squirreling away in the background at Clarks with a really small team of people new to the business, and they were working on launching the first transactional website. Now, I was a merchandiser, that's what my trade was, but it was like, I need a change, so it's either I move on or I try something different. So I took a leap of faith, and I joined this small band of merry folk. I think there was 12 of us to start off with, and we launched the first ever transactional website for Clarks. Now, it's a big business, it's an old business. Some of the challenges we had were, well, nobody's ever going to buy shoes online. Okay, we'll beg to differ, so we carried on. So in 2008, we launched, 15th of October, ingrained in my brain, and my career changed overnight. I moved from merchandising into e-commerce, and that's where I've stayed ever since. So the next thing we did was look at international expansion in Europe. So we launched in 2011 a European Clarks.eu, English language, European currency. We also launched France and Germany, and at the same time, our counterparts in the US launched Clarks USA. So we'd started our international journey that had begun many years before from a retail point of view. And it didn't stop there, we carried on, and in 2012, regardless of what the slide said, we actually launched in the Netherlands and Spain, not France again. I'm not quite sure what happened there. We didn't mess it up the first time, we actually did Netherlands. So it carried on and we started growing. So we now have, across mainland Europe, we have 6 transactional websites, and in the US we have a US website. And then it was kind of what was next. So when we originally launched in 2008, we launched with a multi-channel proposition. So you could buy online for home delivery, you could buy online for collect from store, you could buy in-store for home delivery, and in-store for collect from store, except for kids, which sounds bonkers and was bonkers. However, there was very big business reasons why we didn't. So the next big thing we looked at was actually launching kids for home delivery. And we actually worked with CX partners, and it did feel earlier like he was actually talking about our journey as Clarks. So we launched, and that doesn't come up very well, a measure and fit proposition. So basically, alongside the product, we were selling foot gauges as well. Now they feel really quite old-fashioned because they're literally plastic foot gauges that you measure your kids' feet on. But it had all the content around it. That was 2013, and we've not done nothing since, but they were kind of the last big things. We launched on marketplaces in Europe and in the UK, but it was actually at this point in time, we were 5 years in, we had what was then quite old technology that we'd kind of needed to change. It wasn't going to sustain us for the future. We wanted a brand vision that was consistent across the globe, because at the moment we've got the US with their version of the website, the UK and Europe are fairly similar, but quite disparate as well. So we wanted one consistent view of Clarks across the world. And that's where I'm going to hand back to this man, because we started looking at replatforming, and if anybody's done it, you all have the scars and the bruises to prove it. So we started thinking about it then, and there's a further tale to tell on this one, so I'm going to hand back.
Okay. So the replatforming really was primarily focused on the US and Europe. I'll park Asia. I will come back to that a little bit later on. But essentially, a delightful company called SAP bought our SaaS hosted solution out in the US, which was called iCongo. And they informed us that in 3 months' time, they'd be turning off that hosted solution, which obviously filled everyone with great joy and delight at the thought of doing a replatforming for not only a B2C online solution, but a B2B online solution as well, because at that point, iCongo was running both our B2C and our B2B solution in the US. And yeah, great news, 3 months. So after a little bit of renegotiating with them and agreeing to kind of move into Hybris, which is their, again, a lot of people here I know are familiar with ATG and WebSphere Commerce. Hybris is SAP's equivalent of that. We decided to pick Hybris. At that point in time, Hybris was still a fairly new software. It had only just been bought by SAP, and they were doing some really cool and exciting stuff with it. So although it did feel a little bit like an arm twist at the time, actually I think if we'd have kind of had the option, we'd have probably come to that kind of conclusion anyway. But essentially, this meant that in the US, we had a SaaS solution, and now we were moving to a internally managed solution. So not only were we doing a replatform in a 3-month window, we were doing a replatform. We're going to have to bring in an engineering function, an operations department, all the other bits and bobs that are included with e-commerce, not just for B2C, but for B2B as well. And at that point in time as well, as Becci kind of mentioned, Europe was beginning to hit some of its technology limits. So Europe was running on a .NET-based platform. That when it was originally purchased, Becci, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 10,000 sales per year, something like that. And at that point in time, I think it was probably doing about 10,000% over the limit of what it was supposed to be doing. And we couldn't change things, so we couldn't actually change the checkout. So the checkout, we could not change the out-of-the-box checkout. That piece of code was not available for us to change. The search functionality in that platform as well, we were unable to change that because effectively it was a pilot piece of software that was only ever really supposed to use as a first kind of toe in the water. And we were getting to the point in Europe where we were having customers hitting our website and we physically just could not serve that kind of level of demand at peak times. So we then had very much a kind of, okay, the US needs changing, Europe needs changing. Why don't we change both and put both on the same piece? Now, as someone else mentioned at the start, I think it was someone from CX Partners, it's always great when you try and do everything at once. It's always a really, really good idea to try and do everything at once. So we decided to move the US first, B2C and B2B, and then follow on with Europe shortly afterwards. And of course, everything went to plan. We did our 3-month replatform in about 9 months. And at the end of that, we realized that putting B2C and B2B on the same platform was perhaps not the best idea that we'd possibly ever had. And at that point, we decided to take a pause, and we decided to then look at that technology solution, look at that technology stack, work out how to use it a bit more effectively. And that's when we took the decision to kind of do Pangaea again, but this time focused around Europe. And this time really, really focus on that consumer experience and making sure we got that right without the kind of time pressures that we have with the US. Now, why did we do some of these things? So obviously, burning platform, technology limits, etc. But what we really, really wanted to make sure was that as we begun to bring all those separate companies that have been apart for 60 years and bring them in and bring them together, we wanted to try and ensure that we had a common and consistent brand experience across the piece so that we could start selling kids' shoes into the Americas. We could start selling some of the older end market that we had in the Americas into Europe. And really, really focus on kind of removing some of those technology constraints at the same time building that common, consistent way of speaking to our consumers. Because although, as was mentioned earlier, there are differences in markets, we were finding that when we were running our MVT program, and we were finding that the red button works best in Europe, unsurprisingly, when we ran that same test in the US, the red button also worked pretty well in the US. And essentially kind of increase the speed to market. So really focusing on that consistent consumer experience, not just in one region or one country, but globally. But obviously that also brought with it some challenges. So we've just gone from being a business that has many, many different platforms, many, many different systems, almost each country having its own e-commerce platform, being tailored in its own way, having its own change roadmap, to now one platform that all of a sudden everyone wants to make changes to at the same time. And I'm going to park it there. I'm going to hand back to Becci, who's now going to speak to you about, from a consumer perspective, how we're handling some of these.
So this is where I get a little bit overexcited, because for me, we've done all the pain and the bruises and the re-platform. We've nearly got the US back on to our version of the platform. So if the foundations are there, we've got a platform that's going to help us do cool stuff, because we haven't done a lot of cool stuff recently. And it's all about the consumer for me, or the customer. A year ago, our European traffic through mobile was 44%. This year, year to date, it's 55%. That's a massive swing in 1 year, and that's why the customer has to be first, because what they're doing and how they're behaving is changing so rapidly. Our problem is we can't currently change with them. We've got a legacy way of working, a non-digital way of working that's stopping us. I'm here because I want these guys in IT to succeed, because I can't succeed in what we want to do unless they do. I don't like doing this thing up here, don't like talking to people. But that's why I'm here, because we have a really exciting journey about to start in the business teams. We're looking at our culture, we're looking at our ways of working. We're not going to get it right first time, but we're absolutely starting a new phase in our digital journey. We're looking at omni-channel, your shoes, wherever you want them, whenever you want them. We're looking at personalisation, and I know that's a buzzword, and I've been to a few conferences lately thinking, I'm going to get all the answers of how to do personalisation. And I haven't got any yet, but we're going to do it anyway. We're going to start small, and we're going to do the basics, but I can't do it without these guys. We want to build in test and learn. We've talked earlier about hypothesis and test and learn and go to prototypes and test and talk to our consumers. That's kind of what we want to do as well. But ultimately, if we do that and we get our asses in gear, unless they do, we can't deliver it. So we want new sites in new markets. We've got a whole European market out there. We're only in 6 of them. We've got Asia Pac that also want new platforms. We've got America who are going to want Canada. We've got new marketplaces out there that we want to get on board with. We need to be meeting consumer expectations. The biggest fear is that we don't keep up with the consumers. It's not keeping up with what everybody else is doing in the retail space. It's actually keeping up with what our consumers are doing. But I still can't do that without these guys, because I'm not a coder. I'm just not. I'm really passionate about the consumer. I'm really passionate about changing the way we work to be able to keep up with our consumers. So for us, in terms of our next phase of our journey, super exciting, but a little bit scary because we have to have a complete mindset change, both in the business teams and within IT. We need to change every aspect of how we work, and we have to be digital first. And actually, we have to be, I haven't got my mobile with me, we've got to be mobile first, because actually, in Spain, over 60% of our traffic's coming from a mobile phone. That's bigger than it is in the UK. So those market differences that Tree talked about earlier, they're hugely important because we can't go into these new markets without knowing that. But we can't go into these markets unless we've got the IT capability to do it. So hence why I'm stood on this stage. I've had my photograph taken, which I also hate, and I'm stood on this stage talking to you guys. So, and I'm doing it because I want them to succeed, because I can't do any of this without them.
Right, now I've done all the annoying facts and dates and stuff, I can actually talk about the things that I care about now. So you might think it's weird, right? An IT guy standing up on the stage, and I'm not going to talk about technology. Okay, I'm going to talk about technology a little bit, but I'm actually going to talk more about how we work. And that is what is really, really, really important in this global singular code base, singular change. So I'm sure most people, again, particularly if you've got big kind of company experience, you're probably used to an environment where he who shouts loudest gets first, and then everyone else kind of follows on behind. Lots of nods. I think lots of people kind of vaguely familiar with that kind of attitude. Well, we've now got, and I forget, oh no, I've forgotten facts, 70, whatever it was, countries, all yelling, all wanting change at the same time, on both B2C platforms and B2B platforms. Now, historically, we've used a third-party delivery partner in various different locations geographically across the world to deliver things on those separate platforms. But now, we're all on this singular code base, this singular global instance. It's great, right? You know, our IT costs have shrunk dramatically. We change that red button once, we change it on X number of different countries. Everyone's really happy because they get their red button really fast, really cheap, except for the fact that we can only make one change at a time, which basically means when we get that red button request, if there's 30 other requests, we have to work out where that red button request is going to go in that list. And that comes back to our legacy ways of working. And actually, this isn't a technology problem. So most people would immediately jump and think, right, I need to get loads of new technology in, fix my IT issues, etc. But it's not an IT issue. So what are we going to change?
The way they work.
We're going to look at collaborative working. So what this means is not just myself and Becci working well together, but myself and Becci, there's a gentleman called Rick Almeida, who's the kind of US equivalent of Becci. We've got some guys out in Asia, etc. It's about all of us all sitting together and all working together to work out what the right way of doing, the right way of changing something, etc. is. So that, yes, we might still have that singular global code base and that singular platform, but now actually we're not just looking at what's important for one country or one region, what IT thinks is important, what the business thinks is important, but we're thinking globally and holistically about what's most important for us as an entire business. Consumer and product-led thinking. So it might sound odd that a company that's 191 years old doesn't necessarily think that much about consumers and product-led stuff. But if you think about some of the stuff that Becci said earlier on around omni-channel, etc., you know, there's a real mind shift there away from thinking, here's a spec IT, go off and deliver it, and thinking much more around, you know, what the consumer wants and needs. Agile prioritization. So again, I know Agile's been around for quite a while. It's quite a big buzzword amongst some of the IT people. But really, really it is about thinking, now we've got all these countries on that platform. If a law changes in China or a law changes in Japan or a state has a new bit of legislation coming through in the US, we now need to get a lot more rapid around how we change and reprioritize things to encounter those kind of bits and pieces. Seamless communication. So we're now not just communicating to one person about one thing, we're now communicating to 70 different people in different countries about different things in different languages. And really the only way we can achieve that is by building trust. And we build trust by delivering upon our commitments. So how are we going to do that? Well, for a start off, we're moving our hosting supplier. So like a lot of people, when we initially started in e-commerce, we bought a load of tin, we filled a data center, we put our website on it. We're shifting our entire digital e-commerce stack into AWS. And the reason we're doing that is that we can then use the power of AWS to distribute various different bits of technology around the globe and then front load it so that when customers come in from various different geographical locations, they can then hit the bit that's most appropriate to them. We're looking at reuse and not rebuild. So again, like most of retailers, we have a habit of when we want the red button, building an entirely new red button, ripping out the old button, putting the new button in. We're changing our thought process now. And instead of I know I keep using that red button analogy, but we're now just recoloring the existing button. We're looking at automation. So for us to physically be able to cope with 70 different websites all running on a singular platform, we cannot do it through an old build, test, deploy, spec, etc. process. We now need to get a lot smarter. And Matt Mould from Slalom is going to come up and speak about those things in about 30 seconds. Because effectively we're looking at how do we maintain that kind of demand piece across those many, many different websites. And testing. So the bane of Becci and her team's lives is coming in and testing IT's work. But now we're all in this single global kind of singular code base. Rather than just coming and testing her work, every time we make that change for, I don't know, some tax law in Mississippi, we're now going to have to retest all the other websites that are currently sitting on that platform. And of course, we now need to get the cycle time down that IT takes to make those changes down from weeks into days, because if we spend weeks on each change, we're never going to get any change through the platform. And the way we're going to do that is by massively, massively changing our way of working. So a lot of people will look at this and either think that's some very pretty bubbles and pictures on there, or you'll look at it and think that is an Agile Scrum model. Hopefully, most of you will be familiar with a diagram like this. But we're really underpinning that with some key bits of technology. So we're basically enabling us to work on multiple different websites, all on the same code base at the same time with different teams, integrate that all back into that singular code base and do deployments with no downtime. And what I'm now going to do is hand over to Matt, who's going to hopefully explain a little bit about how Slalom are helping us do that.
Yes. Thanks, Simon. Hello, my name's Matt Mould. I work for Slalom. Slalom is a consulting firm, technology and business. We're around 16 years old. We established in Seattle, and I work for the London office in the UK. And I've been there for 3 years, as has the Slalom London office. So back in, I think it was May time this year, as part of mobilizing this program, the digital engineering program at Clarks were seeking a partner. They were seeking a partner to enable them and a partner to help them through the transformation, which is part of a wider IT transformation. So the areas that we covered, Simon's already mentioned the Amazon Web Services piece, AWS. So helping them stand up the core platform that they need, making them enterprise ready, making the website ready to be hosted on Amazon Web Services, which is not a small undertaking if you haven't done it before. Then you have the developer enablement piece. So that's everything to do with bringing the software to life through to the environments, all of the different environments through to production, back down into developer. The change management piece, which was mentioned before by Simon around the how we work. So enabling them through a change management program and bringing that to life. And then on the organization side, what people and teams they need to actually deliver this capability. So in terms of what Slalom have brought help, support, and enablement. This is Clark's program. Slalom is supporting Clark's program. The idea is that Slalom will reduce, Clark's team will increase. Therefore, they will be a success as a result of being enabled, as opposed to outsourcing knowledge to a third party. One example of working together effectively is there was a event called Glastonbury that happened, and it was around the end of June, and we were basically told to not turn up for that week, but we'll come to you. So we carried on working. We couldn't lose momentum. So starting in June, supporting them in this program, we had to work together and we had to collaborate. So pair programming and with the guiding principle of see, do, teach was the way we want to engage. So that's our story, and we hope to leave Clerks enabled, but certainly we're impressed with the program and we're impressed with the commitment to build out that capability internally. Excellent, thank you.
Okay, this is the final slide, I promise you. So essentially, what does this actually mean from a Clerks perspective? It means that we're now looking for talent right across the southwest of England. And we're looking for people who have that kind of global passion, who want that kind of global experience. And we're looking for those individuals to come and join us now. And that's right across the development, testing, DevOps, etc. range. AWS, and we're using some things like Terraform, so we're writing all of our infrastructure as code rather than actually kind of standing it up like traditional infrastructure. And we're doing it in a fully automated manner so that our websites scale and descale dependent on the volume and dependent upon the global geographical location that customer is being served from. And we're also looking for partners. So we're looking for other people like Slalom who are passionate about enabling us as a business. And that's really, really key to us. We're now at a stage in our kind of IT lifecycle where we don't want to kind of give someone else the problem. We want to own the problem ourselves, and what we want is people to come and help us own that problem. So if you think you're one of these two people, or you just generally like to know more, then please come and speak to us. Thank you.